Donald Trump overnight in the recorded statement called on the people to rise up again and take their country back. And he called also on the elements of the Iranian security to lay down their arms. I doubt it will go that smoothly, but I don't know where it will end.
Well, let's now get some American reaction to these US and Israeli strikes. Delighted to be joined by Will Wechsler, who's a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations during the Obama administration. He's now Senior Director of Middle East Programs at the Atlantic Council. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We are hoping to get our next guest in a couple of minutes, but I'll begin with you. Will, what's your reaction to what's been happening?
Well, Donald Trump clearly picked the most aggressive of the options that were put against him. And I believe that they had a target of opportunity in the Iranian leadership that they felt that they couldn't pass up. President Trump was very clear in his announcement. He is going for regime change. Nothing short of that will be a victory at the end of the day. And so he's given himself a very, very high bar to meet. And we are a long way from seeing whether or not that will be the outcome.
And look, why do you think he's done this now?
He's done this now because Iran is at a particularly weak moment, thanks to primarily Israeli successes, but also U.S. successes in bombing the nuclear program. Their ability to counterstrike, while still significant, as we're seeing right now, is a shadow of what it was a year ago. And Iran has proven consistently unwilling to take the steps required by the United States, particularly with their nuclear program, but also with their missile capability and their proxy capabilities, the ability that the Iranian regime have to project their power and cause destruction throughout the region, much less what they've done to their own people, where, let's not forget, just a few weeks ago, they killed their own people who were peacefully protesting at a rate that exceeds the rate of killing in Gaza, in Syria, in Yemen, in Sudan, even in the genocide in Rwanda. It was an incredibly fast rate of killing that we saw. So I think when you add all that together, that's why Donald Trump did what he did.
And we spoke to a former British ambassador a couple of minutes ago who was very clear, saying this action is breaching international law because it was a preemptive strike, does not count as a self-defense. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's true. The international law, which from Donald Trump's perspective is a relatively modern invention, and he would prefer to go back to a time before that invention. But it is an invention that has boded us very well for a number of decades. It has been part of the considerations of every administration that I've been part of in the United States. It does not seem to be part of the consideration matrix for the Trump administration.
And, the UN Security Council is going to be meeting this evening. Lots of people are sort of saying, the kind of international response is interesting because it's quite sort of mixed, and certainly from what our ambassador was saying, and people are sort of saying, look, this is a breach of international law. But is the UN Security Council meeting just going to look quite impotent? What do you think will happen at this meeting tonight, Will, or will it just look quite impotent having this meeting when actually these strikes are just ongoing in real time?
Yeah, it'll be relatively performative. We'll see. The United States has a veto. Nothing's that's going to be passed that's going to criticize the United States in that regard. That's just the nature of the power dynamics of the world. Again, from President Trump's point of view, and whether you agree with it or disagree with it, I think it's important to understand it. He and the people around him would argue that if the outcome of focusing on international law is to mean that the regime that we have in Iran is protected by it and is able to butcher their own citizens and threaten the entire region, then international law is not serving interests, and interest is the most important end result. That's the argument that you have to understand. Again, it remains to be seen how this ends, and we're a while away from that. If this ends in the most positive outcome, then there's going to be a real reconsideration of people who prioritize international law above the end. If it ends in a very bad outcome, and an outcome where there's an IRGC-istan, a military takeover of Iran that's not theocratic but is equally terrible to its people and threatening abroad, if it ends up in chaos, if it ends up, then Donald Trump and his administration will be the victims of very negative assessments in history. But the reality is, at this stage, right now, we don't know. We don't know what the outcome.
And as you say, hugely consequential, could be sort of really make or break for Donald Trump's sort of international orthodoxy that he's pushing and wanting to sort of do things differently. As you say, if it goes in the right direction, then he may well be hailed a hero by many, and people may say actually he's done the thing that diplomacy has failed to do for such a long time with Iran. But as you say, if it goes wrong, it could be a really bloody mess. And what's the reaction in America? What are the politicians saying? What's the media saying? What's the view in America?
I think the general view is one of concern because people don't know where this is going to end. The what you hear a lot is statements made through a political lens a lot right now. But most people are sort of keeping their proverbial powder dry and trying to see where this goes before the politicians come down with where they always
And
stood.
have the Democrats said much on this? Have they been quiet?
There was a lot of talk among some parts of the Democratic Party in advance, and they were mostly focused on procedural questions about international law, about whether Donald Trump should be going to the Congress to request a war powers resolution. The reality is that Congress, for many decades, has basically establish a system where they maximize their ability to complain about the executive branch and minimize their responsibility for any actions. And that's not a critique of the Democrats or the Republicans. That's just a critique of what Democrats have done, and Republicans have done for many decades. So when you ask what the comments were, it's mostly about these procedural questions. There are some, particularly on the left, and joined by some, particularly on the right, the Tucker Carlson, the Marjorie Taylor Greens as well, who, on a more principled policy perspective, were against these actions and have been speaking against them for a number of weeks now.
And look, in terms of regime change, which is clearly something which Donald Trump is very keen to do, although he has also said sort of it's now, once they've done their strikes, he sort of said over to the Iranian people, it's their hour of freedom is at hand. Somebody who's sort of familiar with the area and you worked on special operations, what kind of behind the scenes support do you think is maybe going on? Because the people of Iran, as you just said, have just been absolutely brutalized. There was this incredibly violent crackdown in terms of their recent uprising. They thought that they were going to get some help from Donald Trump. It didn't come. You have got the son of the former Shah, Reza Pahlavi, actually kind of saying, almost indicating that people are ready to sort of step forward. But do you think work will be going on behind the scenes with American sort of special agents or Mossad? What do you think is going on behind the scenes to make? Because regime change is just not going to happen by itself.
Regime change doesn't happen from the sky. Regime change happens on the ground, and we don't have forces on the ground. The only forces that are on the ground are the Iranian people. Now, the good news is that for the last decade or so, the Iranian people have taken almost every single opportunity available to them to express, in increasing levels of severity, their degree of distaste for the regime. With the Women Life Freedom movement, which attacked the ideological and theological underpinnings of the regime, that women were allowed to wear what they wanted. And then in the most recent protests, which attacked the regime itself, where people were calling for the regime's ouster. And as you say, they did that to no small degree because Donald Trump encouraged them to do so and then sat back while they were butchered. So it is completely reasonable to assume that people who have been on the receiving end of such butchery would be deterred from going out again, and no one in a right mind sitting thousands of miles away could excuse them for their self-preservation instinct. But at the same point, I think that we far away generally make a consistent mistake. We underestimate the willingness of a people to rise up against their masters. We made that mistake 47 years ago with the Iranian Revolution itself. We made that mistake with the Arab Spring. We were surprised when Mubarak fell. We were surprised when Assad fell in Syria. And it would not surprise me if the Iranian people take this opportunity to rise up. Donald Trump overnight in the recorded statement called on the people to rise up again and take their country back. And he called also on the elements of the Iranian security to lay down their arms. I doubt it will go that smoothly, but I don't know where it will end.
I mean, none of us know where this is going to end, but just, and that very arresting statistic you gave to us at the beginning, at the rate at which the Iranian regime had killed so many of its own citizens so quickly in such a short amount of time, and rising up again does not bode well, does it?
It does not. But again, we should not underestimate the courage of people who are willing to rise up and put their lives on the line to bring a different future to their people, their families, and their descendants. The small groups of people doing that is what's led to revolutions all throughout history. It would not surprise me if it happens again. It would be understandable if it doesn't, but it wouldn't surprise me if it happens because this is their best chance that they've ever had in 47 years to rid themselves of this regime, this despotic regime that holds them down. And they do that because we have a great amount of force, really incredible amount of force off the coast, already helping them and ready to help them.
But when you say help them, does that mean maybe some kind of limited boots on the ground help them?
Is there a possibility that there could be covert or clandestine actions? Possibility, but there's no indication whatsoever that there's going to be conventional boots on the ground helping them, and that's what you would need if the goal of the United States was to do regime change itself. That is not the goal of the United States by anything I've seen. The goal of the United States is to help those who are on the ground do their own regime change. And that could end up at the end of the day with fire support to local elements. But here are the things that we would be looking for. We'd be looking for the protests to start again. We'd be looking for the protests to not just be an elite activity, but to, in major population centers, but to spread nationally. We'd be looking for there to be nationwide strikes and general workers joining the elites that tend to lead such revolutions. Be looking for elements of the elements that run different parts of Iran, different cities, different townships, basically saying that we're not part of the regime anymore and kicking people out. Be looking for units laying down their arms and saying at least that they're not going to be part of killing their people, much less joining on the other side. Those are the types of things that you look for in the checkbox to see if regime change is coming.
Let's now speak with Suzanne Kayampour, who is an Emmy-nominated American-Iranian journalist based in Washington, who has really knows what's going on with the community. Suzanne, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. What's your reaction to what's happening?
Thanks for having me again, Ayesha. I believe the last time we spoke was when the 12-day war was fully underway in June. And at the time, I had told you that they had been building up to this. Israel had been building up to this operation that we saw and had been cultivating contacts and sources on the ground via their intelligence services for years. And we're now today seeing the full force of that planning. Lots of reports are going around, most of them still unconfirmed, about who has been targeted within the Iranian regime, obviously, notably the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. We don't have the confirmation that he has been killed. However, the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, was on NBC today, speaking on NBC Network, so speaking directly to the American people, and he was asked about if whether or not Ayatollah Khamenei is still alive, and he said he's alive as far as I know. So for me, as somebody who's been following the Iranian regime and has sat in front of these guys eye to eye and they've lied to my face, when I see that this is a foreign minister who likely doesn't actually know.
And look, Suzanne, what do you think about these strikes? Do you welcome them? Do you think this is going to, get change in Iran? What's your sense?
So I have been speaking to sources inside Iran. They've been less and less able to be in touch with us, not just because of the internet going in and out, but also because there's been severe crackdown and instilling fear, frankly, among people to make sure that they don't speak to us so that we don't know what's happening. But the people that I have been able to speak to have been saying that they want, not all of them, but most of them have been saying that they've wanted this. They've been calling for this. They've said that, the worries that attacking Iran would end up like Iraq are unfounded, because if the Americans take care of taking out the regime leadership and taking out their weapons, then the people would do the rest. And I think that's something to consider. I was listening to your program earlier, your guest earlier, saying that there's some concern that perhaps people wouldn't go out in the streets because they would be worried that there would be crackdown again. But I think the difference is now Trump coming out and saying, we're here, we're covering your regime change. It's up to you to do it, in tandem with us effectively, is what he's saying, is really crucial. I mean, Trump hasn't said that about anywhere else. I know we hear that, President Trump did regime change in Venezuela. That's not completely true. They did kidnap Nicolas Maduro, the leader, and now his deputy is in charge. Is that regime change?
And so, because I'm glad you listened to that last bit of the conversation with Will Wechsler, and he was saying that obviously what is the ideal situation is that people naturally rise up, even though they have had a huge amount of brutality. But what is the infrastructure, Suzanne, that is there to help people rise up? Because, whatever is left of the regime maybe survives. I mean, we know they're brutal, we know they're bloody, we know they're incredibly violent. What help are there regional partners going to help people? How does this actually happen?
So I was actually a fellow at Atlantic Council working under Will. And so we together at Atlantic Council covered what the Iranian regime had been doing over the past couple of years to prepare for this. And a lot of that was their digital operations. And cutting the internet is a big part of the way they'll try to suppress people coming out, because they don't want people organizing. So I think number one is making sure that there's the sort of technical infrastructure for the people inside, so that they're not cut off and so that they can communicate and they know what's happening. As far as regional partners getting involved, the Iranian regime has already involved regional partners, because my phone is getting inundated with videos coming in from Dubai, where I was living for the last couple of years. And in fact, the people living in our apartment in Dubai are sending videos of missiles going over the Dubai marina. And so regional partners are involved.
So, because we've got about a minute or so left. Do you think, Suzanne? Then, I mean, obviously, this is very early. We're in the very early hours of this. We don't know what's going to happen, but so many people have said, every time there's regime change, we all get very hopeful from outside Iran, and then it ends in tears. Do you think this time could be different?
I mean, I think everybody is hoping that this time can be different. Quite frankly, a lot of it comes down to keeping an eye out for defections. The IRGC does run deep. I mean, IRGC in Basij, that's about 200,000 people. Now, the question is, where is the off ramp for them? How are they going to be able to save themselves? That's really the question. And what offers are they going to be given?
And if the Supreme Leader Khamenei does get killed or is killed, is that a moment, or will he be quickly replaced by somebody, or would that provide a moment?
I mean, I think this is why the question of whether or not he's been killed, and I don't want to kind of put words in people's mouths or even give anybody any ideas, but we're living in an AI age, and we're living in an era of disinformation and deep fakes and all of that. And so I think we're gonna have this is the moment. So if he is killed and if he dies, that is the the light. That is the light that it will get everybody into the streets, and they know that. And so I think that is the moment.